The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when Frank woke up. He didn't need an alarm clock anymore. 40 years of fishing had trained his body to rise with the tide. He rubbed his weathered face and looked out the window. The storm last night had been one of the worst he'd seen in years. Trees bent sideways, rain lashing against his windows like someone throwing handfuls of pebbles. Now the morning was eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. Frank made his coffee strong and black the way he always did. His joints ached more than usual today. Weather's changing, he muttered to himself, a habit he'd picked up after his wife passed 5 years ago. Talking to himself made the small house feel less empty. After breakfast, he grabbed his fishing gear and headed down to the shore. Blackwater Bay wasn't much, just a small coastal town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The tourists came in summer for the beaches, but now in early spring, the town belonged to the locals again. The beach looked different after the storm. Driftwood scattered everywhere, seaweed piled high in clumps, and the usual walking path had been washed away completely. Frank carefully made his way toward his favorite fishing spot, picking through debris as he went. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was just a large piece of metal debris, maybe part of a boat that had broken loose during the storm. But as he got closer, he realized this was something else entirely. Half buried in the wet sand was what looked like a small submarine. Not a toy or a model, but an actual submarine, maybe 20 feet long. Frank stood frozen, his fishing rod hanging limply at his side. In all his years on this bay, he'd never seen anything like this. The object was sleek, with an unusual metallic surface that seemed to change color slightly as clouds passed overhead. It wasn't rusty or damaged like you'd expect something that had been tossed around in a storm to be. In fact, it looked almost new except for the sand and seaweed clinging to it. "What in the world?" Frank whispered, taking a step closer. There were no markings he recognized. No flags, no numbers, nothing to indicate where it came from. Just some strange symbols etched into the side that looked like no language he'd ever seen. Frank pulled out his phone and called his fishing buddy. "Pete, you need to see this," was all he said. Within 30 minutes, Pete arrived, huffing and puffing from the walk down the beach. He wasn't as fit as Frank, having spent more years behind a desk at the town's small hardware store than out on the water. "This better be good," Pete grumbled, then stopped dead when he saw what Frank was standing next to. "Holy, what is that thing?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Frank said. "Help me dig around it a bit." The two men worked for almost an hour, clearing sand away from the strange vessel. The more they uncovered, the stranger it seemed. The material wasn't quite metal, wasn't quite plastic, but something in between. It had a slight give when pressed hard, almost like it was alive. "Should we call someone?" Pete asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Like who? The Navy, the Coast Guard? Who deals with random submarines washing up on shore?" Frank ran his hand along the smooth surface. "There's no rust. No barnacles. Nothing growing on it." "That's not natural," Pete said, taking a step back. "Everything that sits in the ocean gets stuff growing on it. Everything." Frank nodded slowly. "Let's see if we can find a way inside." "Inside? Are you crazy? We don't know what this thing is or where it came from." "Exactly why we should look," Frank insisted. He walked around the submarine, looking for a hatch or door of some kind. Near what he assumed was the top, he found a circular plate that looked like it might be an entrance. "I'm going to get some more people," Pete said, backing away further. "And tools. We need tools if we're going to open that thing." While Pete headed back to town, Frank stayed with the submarine, feeling drawn to it in a way he couldn't explain. The symbols etched into its side seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. He took photos with his phone, but strangely the images came out blurry, as if the camera couldn't quite focus on the vessel. An hour later, Pete returned with 4 more people: Hank from the gas station, Darlene, who ran the diner in town, Officer Bill, who was the town's only full-time police officer, and Ray, who taught science at the high school. "This is unprecedented," Ray said, adjusting his glasses as he examined the submarine. He had brought a small kit of tools and began taking samples of the unusual material. "The composition appears to be some kind of advanced alloy, but there's something organic about it too." "Organic? Like it's alive?" Darlene asked, keeping her distance. "Not alive exactly, but responsive somehow." Ray pressed his hand against the surface, and everyone gasped as the material seemed to darken slightly under his touch. "We should call the federal authorities," Officer Bill said firmly. This is beyond our jurisdiction. Could be military. Could be foreign. Could be not from this world at all, Hank whispered, and everyone fell silent for a moment. Don't be ridiculous, Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. The strange submarine did have an otherworldly quality to it. Ray continued his examination while Officer Bill made some calls. Darlene had brought coffee and sandwiches, sensing they might be there a while. The small group ate quietly, all eyes on the mysterious vessel. The Coast Guard's sending someone, but it'll be a few hours, Officer Bill announced after finishing his calls. They said not to touch anything else until they get here, but Frank couldn't help himself. While the others were distracted, he returned to the circular plate he'd found earlier. Up close, he noticed a series of indentations around its edge, like fingerprints. Without thinking, he pressed his hand against one. A low hum began to emanate from the submarine, so faint at first that Frank thought he was imagining it. Then the others heard it too. What did you do? Pete hissed, jumping back. Nothing. I just touched it, Frank said, though he knew that wasn't quite true. The humming grew louder and the sand beneath the submarine began to vibrate. Small blue lights flickered on along its length, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. Everyone back up, Officer Bill commanded, drawing his gun out of instinct, though he kept it pointed at the ground. They retreated several yards up the beach, watching in amazement and fear as the submarine seemed to come to life. The circular plate that Frank had touched began to rotate slowly, counterclockwise, making a sound like air being released from a pressure chamber. It's opening, Ray whispered, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. Indeed, the plate was unscrewing itself somehow, revealing a dark space beneath. When it had fully detached, it hovered for a moment, then gently set itself down in the sand beside the opening. From where they stood, they couldn't see inside, just a black hole in the strange vessel. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the continuous humming from the submarine. I'm going to look, Frank finally said, taking a step forward. Frank, don't, Darlene called out. Wait for the authorities. But Frank felt compelled to see what was inside. This was his discovery on his beach, and something deep within him needed to know. He approached cautiously, aware of the others watching him with a mixture of fear and awe. As he got closer to the opening, the humming changed pitch, becoming almost melodic. Frank leaned over and peered inside, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the darkness. What he saw made his blood run cold. The inside wasn't what he expected. No controls, no equipment, nothing that looked like the interior of any submarine he'd ever seen pictures of. Instead, the walls seemed lined with a translucent material that pulsed gently, like the inside of some giant living thing. And there in the center was a seat that looked like it had been grown rather than built, and on that seat, Frank stumbled backward, dropping his phone into the sand. What? What did you see? Pete called out. Frank turned to them, his face pale, hands shaking. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, a figure emerged from the opening of the submarine, moving with an unnatural grace that made everyone freeze in place. None of them were prepared for what they saw next, or how it would change their quiet town forever. Time seemed to stand still as the figure emerged completely from the submarine. Everyone on the beach held their breath, frozen in place. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. The being stood about 5 feet tall with a slender frame covered in what looked like a tight-fitting suit that shimmered with an iridescent blue glow. Its face was mostly hidden behind a strange breathing apparatus, but its eyes were visible, large, almond-shaped, and a startling silver color that reflected the morning sunlight. Officer Bill raised his gun higher now, his hand trembling slightly. "Don't move," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Stay right where you are." The figure tilted its head, studying the group with those unsettling silver eyes. It made no aggressive moves, just stood there beside the submarine, seemingly as curious about them as they were about it. "I don't think it understands you," Ray whispered, never taking his eyes off the visitor. Frank took a cautious step forward despite Pete grabbing at his sleeve to hold him back. There was something about the figure that didn't seem threatening to him. Scared, maybe. Lost, definitely. But not dangerous. "Hello," Frank said simply, raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. The figure raised its own hand in a mirroring gesture. Then it reached up and began to remove the breathing apparatus from its face. Everyone tensed, unsure what they were about to see. As the device came away, they all gasped. The face beneath was almost human, with a nose, mouth, and facial structure similar to their own, but the skin had a bluish tint and there were small, scale-like patterns around the temples and cheeks. The being's features were neither male nor female, but somewhere in between, ageless yet ancient-looking at the same time. "It's trying to communicate," Ray said as the being opened its mouth and made a series of clicks and whistles. By now, word had spread through town. Despite Officer Bill's attempts to keep people away, a small crowd had gathered at a distance, their faces showing a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. Some held up phones, recording the unbelievable scene unfolding on their quiet beach. The being noticed the growing crowd and took a step back toward the submarine, clearly alarmed by the number of people. Its breathing became more rapid, visible in the way its chest rose and fell quickly. "Everyone stay back," Frank called out to the onlookers. "You're scaring it." A siren wailed in the distance, reinforcements from the neighboring town's police department or maybe the Coast Guard finally arriving. The sound seemed to distress the visitor even more. It began making those clicking sounds again, but faster, more urgent. Suddenly, the submarine's humming grew louder. The blue lights along its hull pulsed more intensely, and a soft glow began to emanate from the opening where the being had emerged. "I think it's going to leave," Ray said, his scientific mind racing to capture every detail of this incredible encounter. Frank felt an unexpected pang of sadness at the thought. There was so much they could learn, so many questions unanswered. Acting on impulse, he took another step toward the being and spoke again. "Wait, we won't hurt you. We just want to understand." The being paused, those silver eyes studying Frank's face intently. Then, to everyone's shock, it spoke not in clicks and whistles, but in halting, accented English, not, "Say, here." The voice was neither deep nor high, but resonant in a way that seemed to bypass their ears and speak directly to their minds. Officer Bill lowered his gun slightly, his jaw dropping open. Darlene clutched Hank's arm so tightly he winced. Pete whispered something that sounded like a prayer. "What's not safe?" Frank asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "The submarine? This place?" The being raised its hand again, but this time pointed upward toward the sky. They had come, soon. Before Frank could ask who they were, the sound of helicopter rotors cut through the air. The being's head snapped toward the noise, and genuine fear crossed its features. It backed up to the submarine entrance. "Wait," Frank called. "Who's coming?" "Who are you?" The being hesitated at the entrance, then reached into a pocket in its strange suit. It pulled out a small object, a crystal-like stone that glowed with the same blue light as the submarine. It extended its hand, offering the stone to Frank. Frank reached out and took it. The stone was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. The moment it touched his skin, a flash of images rushed through his mind. Vast oceans, darker and deeper than Earth's. Massive structures beneath the waves and glimpses of creatures both beautiful and terrifying. "Warn others," the being said. Then it slipped back into the submarine. The circular hatch began to close itself, screwing back into place with the same mysterious mechanism that had opened it. The crowd surged forward now, phones recording, voices shouting questions. The helicopters were visible now, 2 black military-style choppers approaching rapidly from the south. "Everyone back," Officer Bill shouted, trying to restore some order. "This is now a restricted area by order of the police." But his authority meant little in the face of such an extraordinary event. People pressed closer, held back only by the strange energy now emanating from the submarine. The sand around it began to vibrate more intensely, and the air took on an electric quality that made hair stand on end and skin tingle. Ray grabbed Frank's arm. "What did it give you?" "What was that thing?" Frank opened his palm to reveal the crystal, which now glowed even brighter. "I don't know, but it showed me things. Another world, I think." "Under the ocean." Darlene pushed through the crowd to reach them. "The military's coming, look." She pointed to the road leading to the beach where several black SUVs had screeched to a halt. Men in dark suits and others in military uniforms poured out, running toward the beach. "We need to hide that thing," Pete said suddenly, nodding at the crystal in Frank's hand. "Whatever it is, I don't think those guys should get it." Frank hesitated only a moment before slipping the crystal into his pocket. Something told him Pete was right. This wasn't meant for the government or military. It had been given to him specifically. The submarine was now fully humming, the sound so intense it made teeth rattle. The blue lights were nearly blinding. Sand swirled around it as if caught in a localized dust devil. "It's going to leave," Ray said, his voice filled with wonder and disappointment. The men in suits and uniforms were running across the beach now, shouting orders and pushing civilians aside. One man in the lead held up some kind of badge and was yelling about national security. Just as they approached, the submarine did something no one expected. Instead of launching into the sea as everyone assumed it would, it began to sink straight down into the sand. The beach seemed to liquefy beneath it, creating a perfect hole that the vessel descended into with surprising speed. "Stop. This is a federal matter," the man with the badge shouted, but it was too late. Within seconds, the submarine had disappeared completely beneath the sand, leaving only a smooth depression where it had been. The officials reached the spot moments later, their faces twisted with frustration and disbelief. The lead agent turned to the crowd, his expression grim. "This beach is now under federal jurisdiction. Everyone is required to surrender any footage or photographs taken in the last 3 hours. Anyone withholding evidence will be subject to prosecution under national security laws." A collective murmur of protest rose from the townspeople. Some were already trying to slip away, clutching their phones protectively. The agent's eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto Frank, who had been standing closest to the submarine. "You," he said, pointing. "You made contact with the visitor. I need you to come with me for debriefing." Frank felt the crystal burning in his pocket like a hot coal. He glanced at Pete, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. "I didn't see anything special," Frank said with a shrug. "Just some kind of submersible that got washed up in the storm. Then it sank back into the sand. That's all." The agent's eyes narrowed. "We have satellite footage of the entire incident, sir. Lying to a federal agent is a serious offense." Before Frank could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Not just where the submarine had disappeared, but the entire beach. People staggered, trying to keep their balance. In the distance, car alarms started blaring. "Earthquake?" someone shouted. But Frank knew it wasn't an earthquake. Somehow he understood it was a message. His hand closed tightly around the crystal in his pocket as the rumbling intensified. Whatever secrets the visitor had shared with him, whatever warnings it had given, the time to understand them was running out. And somewhere deep beneath the waves, something was stirring. Something connected to the submarine and its mysterious passenger. Something that was about to change their small coastal town forever. The trembling intensified. People struggled to stay on their feet as the sand shifted beneath them. The government agents looked around wildly, their training clearly not covering this situation. Several of the townspeople began running toward the road, away from the beach. "Everyone evacuate the area," the lead agent shouted, abandoning his interrogation of Frank for the moment. "Move inland now." Frank felt the crystal pulsing more rapidly in his pocket, almost in time with the tremors. He locked eyes with Pete and gave a subtle nod toward the fishing boats docked at the small pier about 100 yards down the beach. Pete understood immediately. As chaos erupted around them, the two old friends slipped away from the agents, who were now focused on controlling the panicking crowd and calling for backup on their radios. "Whatever that thing is, it's affecting the crystal," Frank said once they were out of earshot, patting his pocket. "I think they're connected somehow." They reached Pete's boat, a weathered but reliable 20-footer that had seen countless fishing trips. Ray was already there waiting for them, having anticipated their plan. "I figured you'd try to get away," the science teacher said, "and I want to see that crystal up close." Frank hesitated only briefly before nodding. Ray's scientific knowledge might be useful, and his eyes showed genuine curiosity rather than the controlling interest of the government agents. "Let's go then," Pete said, starting the boat's engine. "We can head up the coast to my cousin's cabin. No one will look for us there." As they pulled away from the dock, Frank looked back at the beach. The tremors had stopped, but a bizarre sight was unfolding. Where the submarine had sunk into the sand, a perfect circle of water had formed. Not seawater flowing in from the ocean, but what looked like a freshwater pond. Crystal clear and unnaturally still despite the chaos around it. The lead agent was shouting into a satellite phone while pointing at the water. Other agents were setting up a perimeter, pushing townspeople back and confiscating phones. Military personnel were unloading equipment from the back of a truck that had just arrived. What looked like scientific instruments and diving gear. "They're going to try to follow it," Frank said. "Good luck to them," Pete replied grimly, turning the boat northward and opening up the throttle. I've been diving these waters for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened today. Once they were safely away from the harbor and the commotion faded behind them, Frank finally pulled the crystal from his pocket. In the daylight, its blue glow was less noticeable, but it still had an otherworldly quality, catching and reflecting light in ways that seemed impossible. "May I?" Ray asked, extending his hand. Frank passed him the crystal. The moment it left his palm, the visions that had been flickering at the edges of his mind disappeared completely. Ray turned the object over in his hands, examining it from all angles. "It's warm," Ray noted with surprise, "and it seems to have some kind of internal structure, like circuits or veins running through it." He handed it back to Frank. "Did the being say anything about what it is?" Frank closed his fingers around the crystal again, and immediately the connection returned. Distant images of deep-sea structures and strange creatures. "Not directly, but when I touch it I see things. Another world, I think, under the ocean." "Like Atlantis?" Pete asked, keeping his eyes on the water ahead. "No," Frank said slowly, trying to make sense of the flashes he was seeing. "Not like anything from our myths or legends. It's alien, but it's here on Earth, deep underwater." The boat rounded a bend in the coastline, and Pete's cousin's cabin came into view, a small, wooden structure perched on a cliff overlooking a secluded cove. Pete guided the boat toward a tiny dock jutting out from the rocky shore below the cabin. "No one comes here this time of year," Pete explained as he cut the engine. "We should be safe for a while." As they tied up the boat and climbed the steep path to the cabin, Frank's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Darlene. "Frank, are you safe?" Her voice was hushed and anxious. "Yeah, we're okay. What's happening there?" "It's crazy. The whole town's been put on lockdown. They're calling it a chemical spill from a research vessel, but nobody's buying it. Too many people saw what really happened." She paused, lowering her voice further. "They're looking for you, Frank. They've been questioning everyone who was on the beach. I think they know you took something." Frank's hand tightened around the crystal. "How would they know that?" "I don't know, but they're determined to find you. Be careful." The line went dead. Inside the cabin, Ray had already cleared the dusty dining table and was laying out paper to take notes. "We need to document everything while it's fresh in our minds," he said. "Everything," the being said, "everything you're seeing through the crystal." Frank placed the crystal in the center of the table. In the dimmer light of the cabin, its blue glow was more pronounced again, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It said, "They come, soon, and warn others," Frank recalled. "But warn them about what? And who's coming?" "I think we need to find out what this thing actually is first," Pete said, nodding at the crystal. "Can you control the visions you're getting, or are they random?" Frank hesitated, then placed both hands fully around the crystal and closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts. "Show me what I need to know," he whispered. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Images flooded his mind, but clearer now, more structured. He saw vast cities beneath the waves, built from the same strange material as the submarine. He saw beings like the one they'd encountered, but thousands of them, living and working in these underwater structures. He saw them monitoring Earth's oceans, studying the life within them. And then he saw something else. Massive ships, different from the submarine, darker and more angular, descending from the sky into the ocean. The underwater cities in turmoil, under attack. Frank gasped and pulled his hands away, breaking the connection. "They're refugees," he said, his voice shaking. "The being from the submarine, its people, they've been hiding here in our oceans for a long time. But now they're being hunted by something from out there." He gestured vaguely toward the sky. Ray and Pete exchanged concerned glances. "Are you saying we're caught in the middle of some kind of alien conflict?" Ray asked, his scientific skepticism battling with what he'd seen with his own eyes on the beach. "I don't know if that's the right word," Frank said, "but yes, something like that. And I think the tremors, the strange water where the submarine disappeared, it's just the beginning." As if confirming his words, the cabin began to shake slightly. Coffee mugs rattled on the kitchen counter. Outside birds took flight from the trees, calling out in alarm. "Another earthquake?" Pete asked, moving toward the window. "No," Frank said, feeling the crystal growing hot in his hands. "Not an earthquake." He went to the window and looked out toward the ocean. What he saw made his blood run cold. About a half-mile offshore, the water was behaving strangely, bulging upward as if something massive was rising from below. The surface broke and a structure began to emerge, sleek and dark, much larger than the submarine they'd seen on the beach, but clearly built with the same technology. "They're coming up," Frank whispered. "All of them." As they watched, more disturbances appeared on the water's surface. 2 more structures emerged, then another and another. The crystal in Frank's hand was now pulsing rapidly, almost like a heartbeat. His phone rang again. This time it was Officer Bill, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Frank, where are you? You need to get back here. It's happening all over, the coast, the lakes, even the river. These things are coming up everywhere. The military is mobilizing, but they don't know what they're dealing with." He paused, and Frank could hear shouting in the background. "The being from the beach, did it tell you anything? Anything that could help us understand what's happening?" Frank looked at the crystal, then back at the structures now fully visible offshore. 5 of them, arranged in a perfect pentagon formation, their surfaces gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It's not an invasion," Frank said slowly, understanding finally dawning on him. "It's an evacuation. They're coming up because they can't hide anymore. The others, the ones hunting them, they've found Earth. The implications hung in the air between them. Whatever conflict these beings were caught in, humanity was about to be pulled into it too. "Come back to town," Officer Bill said. "Bring whatever that being gave you. The government people think it might be a communication device. If these things are peaceful, we need to talk to them before the military does something stupid." Frank looked at Pete and Ray, who both nodded in agreement. "We're on our way," he said, ending the call, "but I don't think we have much time." As if to emphasize his point, a low, resonant tone began to emanate from the structures in the ocean, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air, through the ground, through their very bones, a sound that felt like both a warning and a plea for help. The ride back to town was tense. Pete pushed his old boat as fast as it would go, the engine grumbling in protest. No one spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts as they watched the shoreline. Every few miles they spotted another of the strange structures rising from the water, some close to shore, others further out to sea. The crystal sat heavy in Frank's pocket. Occasionally he would touch it, receiving flashes of information that were becoming clearer each time. The beings, he now understood they called themselves the Nomari, had been hiding on Earth for centuries, building their underwater cities in the deepest parts of the ocean where humans couldn't reach. They were peaceful explorers who had fled their home planet when it was conquered by another species, the Wreck, a warlike race that harvested resources from world after world. "Look," Ray said, pointing toward town as they rounded the last bend. The beach where they'd found the submarine was now a military zone. Helicopters circled overhead. Tanks and armed vehicles lined the shore road. Soldiers in full combat gear had established a perimeter around the mysterious pond that had formed where the submarine disappeared. But what truly caught their attention was what floated about a half-mile offshore, the largest of the structures they'd seen yet. At least the size of a cruise ship, its sleek surface gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Military boats circled it at a distance, but none approached too closely. "They're afraid," Frank said. "They don't know what it is or what it wants." Pete guided the boat toward a small, less-used dock on the far side of the harbor, away from the main activity. As they tied up, Officer Bill appeared, looking haggard and stressed. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. "It's getting crazy. The government's calling it a first contact situation, but they're treating it like an invasion. They've evacuated half the town, and the other half is either too curious or too stubborn to leave." "It's not an invasion," Frank said firmly. "At least not from them." He patted his pocket where the crystal sat. "They're refugees. They've been hiding here for a long time, but now they're in danger. We all are." Officer Bill looked skeptical but nodded toward Frank's pocket. "Is that what the being gave you?" "The government guys are desperate to get their hands on it. They say it might be a communication device." "It's more than that," Ray interjected. "It's some kind of knowledge transfer technology. Frank can see their memories, their history through it." "Then we need to show them you have it," Officer Bill said. "Maybe you can help prevent this from turning ugly." Frank hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I need to speak directly to whoever's in charge. No intermediaries, no scientists poking at this thing in some lab, just a direct conversation." They made their way through town toward the beach. The streets were eerily quiet, with military checkpoints at major intersections. When they reached the main beach road, they were stopped by armed soldiers. No civilians beyond this point, one soldier said firmly. Officer Bill stepped forward, showing his badge. I'm the local police chief, and this man has critical information about the situation. He made direct contact with one of the beings and was given an object that helps him communicate with them. The soldiers exchanged glances. Then one spoke into his radio. After a brief conversation, they were escorted through the checkpoint to a command center that had been set up in what was normally the beach parking lot. Inside the largest tent, maps and screens displayed the coastline, with red dots marking each location where the structures had emerged. There were dozens of them now, not just along their coastline but all over the world's oceans according to the global map on the main screen. A stern-looking woman in a dark suit approached them. I'm Director Lin from Homeland Security. I understand you have something that belonged to these visitors? Her tone was professional but tense. Frank stood his ground. They gave it to me, and I need to speak with whoever's making the decisions about how we respond to them. Director Lin studied him for a moment, then nodded. That would be me, along with General Thompson here. She gestured to an older man in military uniform who was studying the maps. What can you tell us? Frank took a deep breath and told them everything, about the submarine, the being's warning, and what he'd learned through the crystal. As he spoke, the crystal seemed to respond, growing warmer in his pocket. They call themselves the Namari, Frank explained. They've been hiding in our oceans for generations, ever since they fled their homeworld. They're peaceful researchers and explorers, but they're being hunted by another species called the Wreck. And now the Wreck have found Earth. General Thompson frowned. So we're caught in the middle of some alien conflict? How convenient for them to involve us only when they need help. They've been trying not to involve us, Frank countered. That's why they've stayed hidden for so long. But now they have no choice. The Wreck will arrive soon, and when they do, they won't just be after the Nomari. They'll see Earth as another resource to harvest. And we're supposed to just believe this? Director Lin asked skeptically. In answer, Frank pulled out the crystal. In the artificial light of the tent, its blue glow was striking. Everyone nearby stopped what they were doing to stare at it. This contains their knowledge, their history. I can see it when I touch it. But maybe... Frank hesitated, then held the crystal out toward Director Lin. Maybe you need to see for yourself. She hesitated, then reached out and touched the crystal with her fingertips. Her eyes widened instantly. After a few seconds, she pulled her hand back as if burned. My God, she whispered. They're already here, aren't they? The Wreck? Frank nodded grimly. In orbit, according to what I've seen. The Nomari detected their ships entering the solar system 3 days ago. That's why they're surfacing now. They're preparing to evacuate or fight. A young officer burst into the tent. Ma'am, General, something's happening. The largest structure is opening. They rushed outside. The massive structure offshore was indeed changing, a seam appearing along its top as a section began to rise. The military personnel around them raised their weapons nervously. Hold your fire, General Thompson ordered. Nobody shoots unless I give the command. The top of the structure opened completely, revealing a platform that rose slowly into view. Standing on it were 5 figures, similar to the one Frank had seen emerge from the submarine, but each wearing different colored suits. The central figure, in a silver suit that gleamed in the fading light, raised its hands in what seemed to be a universal gesture of peace. The crystal in Frank's hand suddenly grew hot, almost too hot to hold. He gasped as his mind was flooded with information clearer than ever before. They want to speak with us, he said. They're activating some kind of translation field. As if in response, the air around them seemed to shimmer slightly. The figure in the silver suit lowered its hands and spoke. To everyone's amazement, they heard the words not with their ears but directly in their minds, translated into perfect English. People of Earth. The voice resonated. We apologize for revealing ourselves in this manner. We have lived peacefully in your oceans for generations, observing but never interfering. That time of separation must now end. A great danger approaches, one that threatens both our peoples. The figure gestured toward the sky. The Wreck battle fleet will reach Earth within 24 hours. They have pursued us across 17 worlds, each of which they stripped of resources and life. We can no longer run. We can no longer hide. We must stand together or both our civilizations will fall. A murmur ran through the gathered humans. Director Lin stepped forward. How do we know this isn't some trick? That you're not working with these Wreck? The crystal in Frank's hand pulsed again, and the silver-suited figure turned its gaze directly toward him. The one who carries our memory crystal has seen our truth. We offer to share this truth with any who would know it. We have technology that can help defend this world, but we need your cooperation. Time is short. Frank felt all eyes turned to him. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. Somehow he had become the bridge between two civilizations, with the fate of both potentially hanging in the balance. I believe them, he said simply. Everything they've shown me has been true, and if what I've seen about the wreck is accurate, we need all the help we can get. Director Lin and General Thompson exchanged a long look. We need to inform the President, Director Lin said finally. And the UN Security Council? This goes beyond any one nation's authority. There's no time for politics, Frank insisted, the crystal growing hotter in his hand. The Nomari need access to their underwater cities. They have defensive systems there that might protect us all. Above them, the clouds suddenly lit up with a brief flash of light, like heat lightning, but more intense. Everyone looked up. What was that? General Thompson asked, reaching for his radio. Frank didn't need to ask. The crystal was showing him. They're here, he said, his voice hollow with dread. The wreck have entered the atmosphere. We're out of time. Chaos erupted in the command center as reports flooded in from around the world. More flashes appeared in the sky, bright bursts of light followed by streaking objects descending toward Earth. Military radars were tracking dozens of unidentified craft. Entering the atmosphere, we need to evacuate, General Thompson said, barking orders to his staff. Get everyone inland, away from the coast. No, Frank said, his voice surprisingly firm. The crystal in his hand was now glowing so brightly it illuminated the entire tent. Running won't help. The wreck don't just attack coastal areas. They'll strike anywhere with resources they want. Director Lin grabbed Frank's arm. Then what do you suggest? We have no defense against technology like this. The crystal pulsed, and Frank turned toward the ocean where the Nomari platform remained, the 5 figures still standing calmly despite the commotion around them. They do, Frank said. The Nomari have been preparing for this possibility for generations. They have defensive systems in their underwater cities. He looked at the crystal, then back at Director Lin and General Thompson. They need our permission to activate them. The systems will affect Earth's oceans and atmosphere. They didn't want to interfere without our consent. General Thompson's radio crackled with reports of objects landing in the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic, and seas worldwide. How do we know their defenses will work? The general asked. Or that they won't make things worse. Frank held up the crystal. I've seen what the wreck did to the Nomari's homeworld. Trust me, we want these defenses activated. He turned to Director Lin. You touched the crystal. You saw it too. She nodded slowly, her face pale. I did. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a brief, intense conversation, she hung up. The president is being briefed, but he's authorizing me to make the call based on the situation on the ground. We're giving permission. Frank nodded and walked outside the tent toward the shoreline. The others followed. He held the crystal up toward the Nomari platform, and it flashed 3 times in quick succession. The silver-suited figure nodded once, then raised both arms toward the sky. The other 4 Nomari on the platform formed a circle and raised their hands as well. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low humming began, similar to the sound the submarine had made, but magnified 1,000-fold. It resonated through the ground, the air, the water. Everyone felt it in their bones, in their teeth, in the very cells of their bodies. The ocean began to glow with a blue light that matched the crystal, first around the Nomari platform, then spreading outward in a perfect circle, like ripples from a stone thrown in a pond. Within minutes, the entire visible ocean was glowing. Reports came in that the same phenomenon was happening worldwide in every ocean, sea, lake, and river. What are they doing? Pete whispered, standing beside Frank. They're activating a planetary shield, Frank explained, information flowing to him through the crystal. The water itself is part of it. They've been seeding Earth's oceans with their technology for centuries, preparing for this day. The humming grew louder, and the glow from the water intensified. Then, beams of blue light shot upward from the Nomari structures all over the world, connecting with each other high in the atmosphere to form a web of energy that encircled the planet. Above them, through gaps in the clouds, they could see flashes of light, like distant explosions in the upper atmosphere. The wreck ships, Ray said, watching in awe. They're being intercepted, but not all of them. A dark, angular craft, much larger than the submarine they'd found that morning, broke through the energy web and descended rapidly toward the ocean about a mile offshore. It hit the water with a massive splash, then resurfaced, floating like a sinister island. The top of the craft opened, and figures emerged, taller than humans with sharp, angular armor covering their bodies. Unlike the slender, almost graceful Nomari, these creatures moved with aggressive purpose. One raised a weapon toward the shore. "Everyone down," General Thompson shouted. Before the wreck could fire, a beam of blue energy shot from the Nomari platform, striking the wreck ship. For a second, the entire vessel was outlined in blue light. Then it simply disintegrated, the pieces falling into the ocean like ash. The wreck warriors fell with it, disappearing beneath the waves. "Did they just—" Pete began. "No," Frank said, information flowing through the crystal. "They were teleported. The Nomari don't kill if they can avoid it. They sent them to one of the containment facilities they've built in the deep ocean trenches." More flashes appeared in the sky as the wreck attempted to break through the energy shield. A few succeeded, their ships crashing into oceans and land masses around the world. But each time the nearest Nomari structure would respond, neutralizing the threat. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the attack stopped. The sky cleared, though the blue energy web remained visible, a faint network of light surrounding the planet. The silver-suited figure from the platform approached the shore, accompanied by two others. As they got closer, Frank could see their features more clearly through their breathing apparatus, the slightly blue-tinted skin, the large silver eyes, the expressions that seemed both alien and somehow familiar. The leader spoke again, its thoughts translated directly into their minds. "The wreck fleet has been neutralized.
Those that were not captured have fled."
Earth is safe for now." Director Lin stepped forward. "For now? Will they come back?" "Eventually, yes. The wreck are persistent, but the planetary shield will remain in place and we will help you strengthen your own defenses." The Nomari leader turned to Frank. "You have carried our memory crystal well. You helped bridge our worlds when it mattered most." Frank nodded, feeling strangely emotional. "What happens now?" "Now we must talk properly. Our peoples have much to learn from each other." The Nomari gestured to the crystal. "That contains only a fraction of our knowledge. We have lived on your world for millennia, observing, learning, preparing. We had hoped for a more gradual introduction, but circumstances forced our hand." General Thompson cleared his throat. "So you're proposing, what, coexistence? Sharing the planet?" "We have always shared this planet," the Nomari replied. "We simply remained apart. That separation is no longer possible or desirable. The universe is vast but dangerous. Together, we will be stronger." Over the following days, as the world tried to make sense of what had happened, Frank found himself in an unexpected role, unofficial ambassador to an underwater civilization. The crystal remained with him, growing into something more than just a device. It became a living connection between his mind and the collective knowledge of the Nomari. Representatives from governments worldwide came to the small coastal town that had once been just another dot on the map. The beach where Frank had found the submarine became the site of the first official human Nomari diplomatic meeting. Underwater cameras revealed the true extent of the Nomari cities. Vast, beautiful structures built in harmony with the ocean environment, some dating back thousands of years. "You were right where we needed you to be," Pete said one evening as they sat on his boat watching the sunset. The Nomari platform remained offshore, now a permanent installation with smaller craft coming and going regularly. "All those years fishing this bay and you never knew what was beneath." Frank smiled, feeling the crystal warm in his pocket. It showed him less dramatic visions now, glimpses of possible futures, of humans and Nomari working together, of technologies beyond imagination, of expeditions to distant stars. "The being from the submarine told me to warn others," Frank said. "But I think the warning was just the beginning. There's so much more they have to share, and so much we can share with them." Ray nodded, his scientific curiosity fully engaged by the events of the past week. "They've already helped us understand ocean pollution in ways we never could before. Their environmental technology could save our planet." As night fell, the ocean began to glow faintly, not the intense blue of the planetary shield, but a gentler luminescence that had become common since the Nomari revealed themselves. Sea life was flourishing in ways marine biologists couldn't explain. The barrier between worlds was dissolving. Frank looked up at the stars, wondering what else was out there, what wonders and dangers the vast universe held. The crystal pulsed gently as if in answer to his thoughts. Whatever came next, Earth was no longer alone. And it had all started with a fisherman finding a strange submarine on the shore after a storm. A discovery that changed everything.